Hello, everyone. This is Brian Germain, and this is Casual Chat. I have Scott Miller. Man, I feel lucky. So, for those of you that don't know Scott Miller, Flight One started with this guy. He was his brainchild. He started this next generation movement into canopy courses, and I followed shortly thereafter. But Scott, I credit this with you. And so, before we start anything else and getting into details, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. That's very kind. Yeah. Flight One was not just me at all by any means. It was me and the guys in the PD factory team, especially Ian Bobo and Shannon Pilcher. And if you've ever been to DeLand, if you've ever been to Graham's Kitchen, the little breakfast place, there were many days spent downing large amounts of coffee talking about, what we wanted to do. And before that, I ran the Freedom of Flight Canopy School at Scott Ive DeLand, which, there's the whole history there. If you want to hear that whole story, we can talk about that. And honestly, I credit, just about everything that I did to John LeBlanc, because when I started teaching canopy classes, I was working for John. John was, and, probably still is considered one of the foremost experts in, parachute aerodynamics. And he was out doing his canopy classes at Boogies and, the PI symposium and stuff. He'd been doing that for years, and I learned as much as I could from him, and then said, hey, let's just do this all the
Right.
time.
Now, but I think you were, as far as I know, the first one to like filming landings and debriefing and making this sort of a structured process, right?
I think so. What I believe, and I think you and I, if I remember, were started teaching canopy classes about the same time, because you were doing your free fly coaching and free fly stuff, and you started doing canopy coaching kind of, bridged off of that, didn't you?
I did. Well, I had to
Yeah,
because you can coach somebody in free flying, but if they break their leg on landing, what's the point?
you're
So
exactly.
for
Yeah,
me, it was always part of it. I would always,
yeah,
try to, film their landing and talk about their approach and all that stuff. It is the most important part of skydiving, in my opinion, anyway.
yeah, yeah. Well, if you want to keep doing it, it is. Yeah.
That's the truth. That's the truth. Yeah. So, I mean, I just think it's such an amazing thing to watch how it went from this sort of, kind of a weird idea to, focus only on canopy flight to what it is now. I mean, you can't
Yeah,
throw a rock without hitting a canopy course
yeah.
now.
Yeah, it's funny. I still remember you. I wouldn't be surprised if you had a similar experience. So the first year that I was doing the canopy school at Scott Ive DeLand, which is like around 1999, I didn't actually have that many students. I was available whenever somebody wanted to do it. But I remember one Saturday, I had one student in the canopy class, and it was a lady who she was the typical couple hundred jumps, struggling with her landings, green knees and green butt on her white jumpsuit, terrified of landing, and just needed to learn how to do it the right way. But I remember we were walking to Manifest to get her on a load, and she walked by some of her friends, and one of her friends said, hey, come do four-way with us. And she said, no, I'm taking a canopy class today. And the guy looked at her and said, canopy class? You don't need a canopy class. Like, it was such an alien concept to people to actually take a canopy flight class. And here was somebody who, like, so needed it. Yeah, but to be able to, and with what you were doing and with what we do with Flight One and with the Freedom of Flight School, it's really, that's the one thing I'm really super happy about, is that it did change people's minds, not just, helping individual people with their skills, but changing people's minds about learning how to fly canopies.
Well,
It was
I think
needed.
that's it. That's the root. Is if you can get people to prioritize it and not think of it as work or some structured thing that USPA makes you do.
Yeah,
You get better at canopy flight because you love canopy flight.
yeah,
That's what I feel like. When I've done my job well, I walk away and everybody's like, I want to do more hop and pops. you know,
yeah,
I want to
yeah,
go fly with friends
exactly.
and things like that.
Yeah, I want to play with my canopy more. I'm not afraid of it anymore. Yeah,
That right there is huge. Yeah, I think that people are afraid of it. When they're afraid of it, it's mostly because they don't feel in control of it.
yeah,
And they sort of feel like a victim of the wind and the victim of the, all these other things that feel out of their realm of control. And
yeah.
it makes a difference in the sport as a whole. I think the
Hmm.
canopy flight course model, um, it has changed the attitude massively, and it's certainly we have competition swooping, which has created CP is a thing.
Yeah,
Didn't used to be a thing, But
Hmm.
even more than that, the average bear on the drop zone is kind of, having more fun with their parachute than they used to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's an achievement in itself. Yeah.
Yeah. And recognizing that there's much to learn, right? Like that it's not just what you learn as a student and then, what you hear around a campfire. Like there are actually skills to learn and polish and perfect. And you don't have to just accept, kind of what you're left with or whatever you come up with. You can really not, learn to enjoy it, but learn to perfect it too, which I think is fun.
Expertise is way more fun than sucking. Yeah.
That's
I
a good quote.
it's
That should be on a t-shirt.
it should. It's so I'm remembering early on I had this somebody from a big way camp. There was one of these expensive big way camps going on, and at the time I was running a canopy course and I was on a break, and this
Hmm.
woman who was part of all that stuff and not part of the canopy course said to me, "So Brian, you're doing that canopy course?" I said, yeah. She said, "I don't get it." I said, "What do you mean you don't get it?" It was like, "So you talk for 2 whole days only about the canopy flight part?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "But how? Where is there enough information to talk for an entire weekend, especially if it rains, right?
Hmm.
And they don't get to jump. How do you fill that space?" I'm like, "Well, maybe you should swing by one of the canopy courses and find out what you're
Hmm.
missing. Because if
Hmm.
you think it's the canopy flight is just right, left, and flare, you're missing out on a whole lot of fun."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny just talking about it that way. Like, when I started working for performance designs, I had several thousand jumps. And what I learned totally changed, especially from John LeBlanc, just it was like night and day, the difference between when I walked in the door at PD and a year later, what I understood about canopy flight. And just so many hours sitting in his office in the morning, just talking, and talking about stuff. And John was really funny. One of the things some of the things I learned from John that were really useful. One was he talked about how at one point he decided that everything he knew about flying a canopy was probably wrong, or at least he was going to question it. So he just said, "I'm not going to believe anything I've ever been told or anything that I think I know about flying a canopy." And he went up and experimented and tried things and figured things out and radically changed a lot of what he understood. And when I first started working for him, I remember when I was working for him as a test jumper, I'd be in his office in the morning to be like, people think that when you do this with your canopy, that this is what happens. And I don't think that's really true. I think this other thing is what happens. I'd be like, no way. Like, no way. He'd be like, yeah, why don't you go try it? Hey, why don't you do that on a jump today? Go try, like, this is my job today, right? Is to test this thing that he's telling me about. Go try it and tell me what you think. Bring back your report. And I'd go up and try it. And I'd be like, oh, he's right. It's totally right.
Yep.
And he knew he was right. Right. He just wanted me to go try it, not sit there and hear about it, but go try it. And I think that's when you can instill that in somebody, yeah, use what you've heard and what you've learned as a starting point, but you got to go try it. You got to go do it under your canopy and really experiment, and observe and see what your canopy does. And when you get people interested in doing that, then, yeah, there's so much to learn. There's so much to know,
Yeah. To
you know?
breach the assumptions, right?
Yeah.
That's the scientist. Is the ego has nothing to do with it, and the desire to cling to old ways and old thought processes. You deliberately loosen that grip, that almost death grip, and you
Mm-hmm.
test. You said it
Mm-hmm.
right. You test, and
Yeah.
that's we come from the test piloting background, and I think that
Yeah.
mentality is very healthy to deliberately
Mm-hmm.
explore things that are kind of scary. There's
Mm-hmm.
a thousand things you can think of under canopy, things that where you sort of push edges, and
Mm-hmm.
if you when you go too far, there's something you don't like, and yet if you
Mm-hmm.
don't explore little by little in this incremental process into your own fear, you don't expand your own knowledge.
Yeah. And it can be incremental, like you're saying. That's an important part. You don't need to go up and like, go find some crew dogs and go get in the middle of an 8 stack, right? Like it doesn't have to be that. It can be, it close to your comfort zone, pushing your comfort zone a little bit, stepping just outside of your comfort zone into some exploration of canopy flight that you haven't done.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, flying near people. That's one of the things
Yeah.
that I notice a lot of people have great trepidation about, and yet, if you think about it, every single pattern is a formation, right? It's a
Hmm.
pathway where guaranteed we're all going to the same place, so we're going to see each other again.
Yeah.
We're together in the plane, and then we're together in the pattern. And
Yeah.
therefore, we have to sort of get over that fear through exercising our skills that keep us alive. How do you
Yeah.
stay aware? How do you maneuver away from the person? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so I pair people up at the end of my courses, and I always have. Last jump was like, you with you get a similar wing loading. I don't want you bumping into each other. I don't want
Hmm.
you, sticking your feet in the micro lines, please.
Hmm.
But visit, pay him a visit.
Yeah. Yeah. Visit.
Yeah, actually, I flew
Yeah.
with John LeBlanc. I remember years ago, the first time I flew with him under canopy, I couldn't believe how aggressive he was with his parachute.
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to be very sort of a flowy kind of a guy, and he really jams on it. And actually, this was a long time ago. It was kind of an awakening for me that if you want to get to know your parachute, maybe you don't go straight to aggression, but you do work your way up to finding out if your front risers do something bad by doing
Yeah.
something bad to your front risers.
Yeah. Yeah. And people, I mean, canopies are a lot more. I mean, yeah, they're a lot more. I think people find this out when they do crew. They're a lot more durable than we think when they're flying,
They're resilient.
like,
They're super
you
resilient.
know,
You want to come back
yeah.
to life.
I mean, just talking about, John being aggressive. I mean, some of my favorite test jumps with John, where we'd have a new prototype and, I'd be flying it and he'd want to really take a look at it and see what it's doing. So he'd fly up and he'd be like, sticking his head in like up inside the cat. I'm sitting there flying and he's like right in front of me with his head inside my center cell, looking around at stuff. And yeah, he was like just no hesitation to come up and start poking and pushing on things and be really aggressive. And I also always admired John's ability. And this is, follow your emergency procedures, folks. If it looks bad, get rid of it. If you know it's bad, get rid of it. But John was amazingly good at getting parachutes to fly that shouldn't fly.
Yeah.
Like we'd go, he'd be testing some weird, funky prototype and I'd be videoing or something. And the thing would open up and go, I'd be like, all right, well, I'm going to go, follow the main down so we don't lose it. And then he'd just get it to fly somehow, like miraculously, smoothly. Yeah, so yeah, some of the things like really fun flying with somebody who understands canopies that way.
Yeah.
And can, and flying with people who are more experienced, like I'm sure you've done this with your students, going out and flying around somebody who's comfortable being close to a canopy and isn't going to come up and like, dock on you if that's not what you want, but somebody who's willing to fly, I don't know, 10 meters away,
Yeah.
right? And just show you, hey, there's another person here. And look what happens when I hit my brakes, or look what happens when I pull my front risers,
That's why so many
getting past that
we're using the radio.
trepidation of being close.
Yeah,
What's that?
we use the radios now, and so
Yeah.
I can fly right next to them and give them a hint about what we're about to do before we do it, and I can
Right.
remind them to breathe and slow it
Mm-hmm.
down, and get their zen back, especially after we do something that's kind of dynamic and exciting.
Yeah.
And it really changes people's attitudes inside the skydive instead of afterwards.
Yeah.
That's a biggie.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a game changer.
That's huge, like you say, and that's like going back to AFF, right? The origins of AFF. It's being able to, like you said, adjust people's views and attitudes and where their head's at in the moment in the skydive and not having to wait till they're getting on the ground, and being able to do the same thing with canopy flight.
I mean, AFF. That's where I feel like the model began. With Ken Coleman, right? It was like,
Yeah.
let's not just throw them out of the plane and watch the little white helmet revolve around the little blue rig and hope they pull.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. You've been a static line jump master, huh? You know what that's like.
Yeah, and if I do, and if you remember, back at, I want to say it was the Blue Sky Ranch, you and I were teammates getting our AFF ratings.
That was when we first met. Yep. That was when we first met, wasn't it? At the ranch, when we were both getting our AFF ratings. Yep. That was fun.
And
Yeah. And so funny story. And this is maybe going to entertain your viewers. So yeah, like as Brian and I are saying, as we're saying, we met at the ranch back when, I don't know, I didn't have many jumps at all. It was back in the early 90s, and getting our FF ratings together. And you and I have kind of bumped into each other, throughout the years, right? Like Angie, my ex-wife, was friends with you or your ex. And we remember we were doing the PD tour and we met up with you all in Colorado
Yeah.
and went to that restaurant. I don't remember the name of the restaurant, but they had really good beer. And here's a funny thing, Brian, and this is either going to blow your mind.
Yeah.
And this is for the entertainment of you and all your viewers. This will either blow your mind or you're going to go, oh, I knew that. That's not news.
Yeah.
So my brother-in-law, Franklin, and your brother-in-law, Chris, have been best friends for years.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, Franklin.
Small world. Franklin is my brother-in-law. My wife, Lauren, is married to Franklin's wife. He's my brother-in-law.
Oh my God. Who is, Laura's brother's best friend.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's a small world.
Yeah. It was really funny when my wife, Lauren, and I started dating and, met Franklin, and he's like, hey, do you know a guy named Brian Germain? I was like, yes, I know Brian.
Oh, that's
so.
bizarre. Yeah, no, I think there's something strange about this universe. There's something very odd, where coincidence, you start adding things up. It's like, this is too coincidental. Something else is going on. I can't explain what it is. I just keep noticing.
But it's fun.
Yeah, I keep noticing it. Yeah. So, anyway, so now I wanted to very briefly, if you're interested, show you a new training idea that we just invented yesterday. Now I'm sharing the screen. So here's this contraption. And Matthew, exciting. All right, so Matthew is a 9-year-old kid. Right, this is my son.
Right.
He's got the pull cam on. We're sort of showing off, how that works. This is the field right near my house. I just realized that so many people have become, the only time they're attached to a parachute that's inflated is when they're flying it.
Right.
So maybe they can learn more if we can pressurize it with a little bit of wind. And I've got a kite surfing bar that I now use to help control what's going on. So I can essentially give like a harness turn. And I can pull him up. Now, this is not the first time he's flown the paraglider. I usually just hold on to his harness. But this way I can actually maneuver him if necessary, just with the twist of my wrist there when I do it with one hand. It is really good exercise. And so I'm imagining that this could be something that down the road we can start to, teach people in new ways. That's always been my thing. It's like, what else can we do to prevent injuries from lack of training?
Right.
And so this is something that I've started sort of dabbling in over the past few years. And of course, the virtual reality stuff with people learning to fly the pattern. They can fly the same situation over and over again and eventually hit the target by making different choices. That's we're reaching this level where I don't think we're going to need those radios someday.
Yeah, the student radios.
I don't think we're going to need to tell them what to do under canopy. We might be there to sing to them. You know what I mean?
Can I get on my soapbox? May I get on my soapbox?
Please. That's why you're here.
Because I hope, and maybe I hope that some of your viewers and listeners are maybe instructors or going to become instructors. But I was always very interested in, like you said, new ways of doing things. And even as I ran my canopy school, and especially one of the things I enjoyed the most was when I had opportunities to work with groups of instructors.
Yes.
So there were some drop zones like, Jump Town. They would have me come up there and teach a canopy course over the weekend. And then on Monday, I would do my essential skills course with their instructors, which was really an honor because, some of these people they'd been, teaching for way longer than me and skydiving for, since I was a little kid. But a couple things that I learned, it was very interesting, actually. I was watching one of your episodes where you interviewed Kate Cooper Jensen. And one thing you mentioned there, I think it was you that mentioned it, an observation that, at drop zones in Europe, you don't see them using the student radios very much.
Particularly northern.
So Yeah, I had a very interesting experience when I was just brand new instructor. So I learned to skydive at Flagler Aviation, which you were mentioning Ken Coleman a little while ago. So the owner, one of the owners of Flagler Aviation, Rocky Evans, was on the Rainbow Flyers with Ken Coleman. So for those who don't know, the Rainbow Flyers were 3-time national champion, 2-time world champions in four-way skydiving during the 70s. And some people say that they changed the rules to sequential because it used to be the back loop skydives, right? That was hog flop. That used to be how they did four-way. You just do one point, get out, build a star, do a back loop, the next point, and that's you're done. And then they changed the rules to sequential, and the Rainbow Flyers stopped doing it. And then Ken Coleman, who was Rocky's teammate on the Rainbow Flyers, Ken Coleman, along with Gary Dupree, were the ones who basically created the AFF program. And Rocky was probably maybe the third or fourth person on the planet to start teaching with AFF, because Ken sent Rocky the whole plan and said, hey, you want to start, doing this and experimenting with it. So it was really, I kind of grew up in the sport, made my first jumps and started jumping and hearing all these stories about the Rainbow Flyers and about the development of AFF and about Ken Coleman, which was really amazing. And then the other owner, Rich Fenimore, Fang, a lot of people knew him as Fang, was, again, world record holder, champion. He had worked with Paraflight when they developed the first square reserve. So he was just, amazing skydiver. And they were pretty wild guys on the ground, but they were just amazing in the air. Fang and I went and ran a drop zone in Michigan for a couple summers. And we had we had radios, but they were kind of crappy and didn't really work. So after about one weekend, we stopped using them. So I had the experience of teaching for 2 summers at a drop zone where our students didn't have radios at all. And the airport we were at was kind of ideal for it. It was a big airport, but very, very little traffic at all, other than the jump plane. And there were, like, the town was kind of some buildings on 2 sides, but then the other 2 sides were just open fields, cornfields, with a big, huge grass field in the middle. So it was beautiful for teaching skydiving and teaching canopy flight.
Perfect.
And, we would give them, and I was a really new instructor, right? Like probably had less than 1,000 jumps at AFF rating tandem static line, but hadn't been teaching for very long. So I didn't know as much about flying a canopy as a lot of instructors do, now. It was before I ever worked for PD. So my knowledge of canopy flight was like, this much compared to what I eventually learned. But we took the time in the first jump course to explain really carefully, how to fly the canopy. And then before every jump, the students were looking at the aerial photograph and talking about what their pattern was going to look like. And they went and did it. They just went and did it. And, landings weren't always pretty, but people learned to fly their canopies because they didn't have somebody on the ground treating them like a toy, treating them like a toy, So I think if you're going to use, yeah, like, it's not, if you're going to use radios, that's fine and like I said, I'm on my soapbox now. If you're going to use radios, they're great as a safety backup, but don't treat the student like your own personal radio controlled parachute, right? Like, I would, even with radios, even, later on when I was in DeLand, when we had radios, I would land, from an AFF jump, walk over to the guy who had the radio and take it from him and talk to my student, which, if it was the third jump, would probably be something like, hey, you're looking good up there, do what we talked about on the ground. And that's it. And I'd watch them, and coming on a final approach, if it was like their second or third jump coming in on final, I would be out far enough in front of them so that they would be landing like, 20 meters, 30 meters in front of me.
Yeah.
And I would say, when you're twice my height, flare. And I'd have the radio cued. So if they were late, I could, flare, flare, flare. But you'd see they'd be looking out at me, not looking at the ground, looking out at me. And they can tell when they're twice my height. And then they'd flare with the big old student canopy and it'd be okay. So you can really let students do a lot with minimal strategic help, not telling them everything to do. And, if somebody wasn't paying attention and they landed a little ways away from the truck in July in Florida, they could walk back to the truck, and have a nice warm walk back to the truck and think about what they've done. And, but you learn, right? You learn. So there's so much. And what I used to talk about, I'll get off my soapbox in a second.
Okay.
What I used to talk about a lot when I did training with instructors is, if you look at a student logbook or student record sheet or whatever the drop zone's, using, you would see so many times this detailed description of what they did in free fall, good exit, good 360s, good back loop, whatever, and then good CC.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Right? You know what I'm talking about? Like,
Oh, I do.
the entire canopy flight was described as good CC. So, when I'm working with an AFF student or static line or whatever, half or more of what I wrote in their logbook or what I asked them to write was about what happened in the canopy flight. How did you stay in your holding area? Did you fly a good pattern? How was your flare? Right. And so, it's a change of mindset. I mean, technology is fantastic, and there's so much good technology out there that we can leverage, but just a simple change in mindset with low tech solutions, and you can really have people learn to fly a canopy and make controlled mistakes while they're still under the big canopy, rather than just being a radio controlled skydiver for 7 jumps and then, all right, great, go do it. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox. Rant over.
No, that's why that is why I wanted you on here. You know what I mean? We're in full agreement. Of course, we have a lot of technological advances. I mean, there's, basically now there's going to be this new technology where it'll warn people when to flare, using live systems. And of course, you can stick a little box on the back of the student's helmet, and then you can see the GPS track of where they actually went and say, see where you went downwind at 4,000 feet and past the target? Yeah, that was kind of why you landed off. So all of these things can be useful. I think, though, you said something that really hit with me, is that we can do low-tech solutions and accomplish the same goal. So for the instructors that are at smaller drop zones, there's plenty of options for teaching canopy flight without spending a ton of money and learning, all these new technologies. Just, teach more, teach longer.
Yeah. It's an investment in time. Like, exactly what you're saying, Brian. You got to teach a little longer. You got to spend a little bit of extra time in the first jump course teaching canopy flight. As an AFF instructor, I know everybody wants to get down and pack and get ready for the next load, but watch your student under canopy, and if you're going to have somebody on the radio, they don't have to be an instructor, but they should be part of the instruction team, and they should understand the pattern that the student's been taught and the discussion that the instructor and student had before they got on the airplane about what the student's supposed to be doing, and be able to give that feedback, right? So,
but in some ways, maybe they should be the most experienced instructor that's on the radio, that has the calm voice, that has ideally, it would be like somebody that has a degree in psychology, because you're kind of talking them down off the ledge. You know what I mean? They're really smart. And part of your job is to share that vibe, of speaking slowly and like a sing-song kind of to me, that's your number one job, is keep them relaxed.
Yeah. All right, everybody. So hire Brian to be your radio guy and to train your radio guys how to have the DJ voice. Can we call it the official Brian Germain radio operator DJ voice?
I don't want to own it, but just say the voice that makes them feel at ease, right?
Yeah.
When the guy that's in the cockpit says, we're passing through 42,000 feet on our way to, they don't sound nervous, because they've been trained to sound cool,
Right.
And I think cool means slow, is speaking slowly and clearly. But that's one of the things that we can do to improve the sport. But that's to get meetings of the minds like this together. That's, I feel like, is the most beneficial thing we can do, is say, we've done a lot of great things to build an awesome sport. What else can we do?
Yeah. And may I share one story that I think, again, the instructors out there would find interesting. So this was, again, we were in, little drop zone, Sturgis, Michigan, low budget. We were super low budget. Like I said, we had these cheap radios, didn't work, so we stopped using them. And so, no high-tech solutions there other than a chalkboard and an instructor with a piece of chalk in the first jump course and an aerial photograph before every jump saying, okay, show me where your holding area is, show me the pattern, right? So and this is one of the things that really stood out to me about this whole idea that we had of teaching without radios. and the, what is possible. So I remember we had this little group of skydivers by the end of the first summer that had learned at our drop zone, right? All the local kids who came out and, learned how to skydive. And this is a sunset load, I think. So I drove the van out to the landing area to pick everybody up. And it was a Cessna load. So four of our, the jump numbers probably ranged from 25 jumps to 120 maybe, right? Like somewhere in that range. So they're all going up to do a four-way. And I remember the first person came in, and these were the students that we had trained that had learned at our drop zone without radios, right? And the first student came in and landed pretty close to the truck because they didn't want to walk, right? And then the second person's coming in and kind of adjusts their pattern and comes in and lands next to the first person because they still wanted to land next to their buddy, right? And they're like, man, that was so good. It was such a good jump. And they're just like all jazzed up talking about their jump. Well, the third and fourth people came in and landed right next to them too, because they wanted to stand there next to their buddies and everybody. And so I'm standing there looking at this group of four very low time jumpers who just came and landed in a, 10 meter circle or smaller, right? Like all landed right next to each other, right next to the van. And they didn't think anything of it.
Yeah.
It was really good accuracy, and they didn't think anything of it just because they wanted to land next to their friends and next to the truck and not have to walk.
There it is.
Right. And
that's why we do it. That's
yeah.
why we do what we do, the extra mile,
But, not everybody with 20 or 30 jumps would have that kind of effortless accuracy, right? And be able to land that close to something just because they wanted to, right?
Accuracy is one of the most important metrics that we have in determining somebody's skills.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the softness of the landing is significant too.
Sure.
But I watch a lot of the pattern work that I see sort of when I go to a drop zone I've never been to before, and I watch what's going on in the sky. It's kind of scary sometimes. that these people are grown up skydivers with licenses, and they're kind of all over the place. And it's not always the case. Most drop zones are doing pretty well with the pattern work, with the organization of all that stuff. But the accidents, every time you see even a near miss under canopy or canopy collisions, it drives me nuts. It hurts me.
Yeah,
it hurts my heart. And so I just keep doing what I do.
Yeah. How much time do we have? We running out of time? We got a few more minutes.
Yeah, man, we got time. Sure.
Yeah, because there was something I wanted to talk to you about and see if, how much, because and people may know, like I'm not active in skydiving anymore, been out of it for a little bit. So I'm not like, I still talk to my friends. I still go to DeLand when I can and visit, but, I'm not totally up to speed with, like finger on the pulse of the sport. So you can kind of tell me, how much of this is people are aware of now, Brian, how much are people aware of this? How much is it talked about? Because I think even look at like 10, 15 years ago, people didn't talk about this very much. But so just to kind of paint a picture, I was talking about the drop zone where I learned, right? Run by Rocky Evans, who again, 3-time national champion, 2-time world champion in four-way, thousands of jumps, experienced instructor. By the time that I learned to jump, he, that was all his past. That was all old stuff, Rich Fenimore, Fang, world record holder, jumped into the Olympic Stadium in Seoul in the Olympics, and did all kinds of stuff, did stunts, was one of the stuntmen for the James Bond movie, incredible canopy pilot, very talented. And so just as an example, when I started jumping, which was back, early 90s, I guess. So Rocky, drop zone owner, thousands of jumps, world champion, was jumping a 210. And he's like a little bit smaller than me, I remember Rick Highsmith, who was, he did video at the drop zone. He had a 170, and that was fast, man. That was small and fast because these were the old F111 canopies, right? Which once they had a couple hundred jumps on them, they didn't flare so fantastic. So you needed some nylon over your head. So people didn't jump super small canopies. I think when I was jumping, if you went to DeLand, like the Sabres, the first Sabres were first coming out. And Rickster Powell, who is, my good buddy Rickster, who is, if you don't know who Rickster is, he is probably should be remembered as one of the best canopy pilots ever.
Absolutely.
He didn't compete, but
There was no
amazing canopy pilot.
there was nothing to compete.
What's that?
There was nothing to compete.
Yeah, there was no suit. Yeah. I mean, Richter still jumps. He's still active in everything, but he just never got into the competition side of things. But amazing canopy pilot. And I mean, if you've seen Crosswind, any Patrick Passa's movies, right? Like Crosswind or Anti-Gravity, you get to see Richter landing in the hangar and stuff like that with the stiletto. So back when I started jumping, and Richter weighs probably like 155 pounds soaking wet. And when I started jumping, he was probably jumping like a 150 or a 135, maybe a 120. That would have been like crazy small, you know? And so, like, I'm just painting a picture here of what the sport was like and what canopy flight was like back then. It was big, right? Canopies were big. People with thousands of jumps were jumping 210s. Little skinny, the ladies at our drop zone who weighed like, 125 pounds in gear were jumping 150s, right? With thousands of jumps. So here's the thing. The big difference is people did not die under open functioning parachutes back then.
Not as often.
What's that?
It's true.
Yeah. There was maybe like 1 or 2 canopy related fatalities a year, which was probably people doing CRW after a relative work jump, right? So everybody pulls and like, hey, let's hook up really quick. And, sometimes it doesn't go so good. People landing off, maybe like a demo jump where somebody lands in the water. Like those were the kind of canopy accidents that happened, and maybe like 1 a year, really bizarre ones. You didn't have the low turn. I mean, people made low turns and got hurt and maybe broke a leg, but it wasn't a fatality. And canopy collisions were pretty rare because everybody was moving a lot slower and you had more time to look around and go, oh, look, there's everybody, so you knew where people were. And it was a different world. And like, the reason I'm bringing this up is I don't know how much this is talked about and how much people really let that sink in and understand. I mean, there were still fatalities, but this was before the Cypress came out. This was when AADs were big wind-up things that you had to stick a quarter in, right? So nobody wore AADs. And so, you know what I'm talking about, right? The old FXCs, you got to stick a quarter in it to set it. And they would fire maybe within 500 feet of where you set them either way, right? So experienced jumpers didn't wear AADs. And so the fatalities were no pull, low pull, right? The ones that now are AAD fires. But there was this whole crazy, transition of the graph during the 90s where the people started wearing AADs. So the no pull, low pull fatalities went down, but people started jumping smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller canopies, and the canopy fatalities went up. And, I always want to bring this up. It's kind of grim, but people need to realize that you're making a decision when like you said it right at the beginning, Brian, the canopy, the landing is what's important, right? Probably the most important. The last couple inches are the most important out of the skydive. And the thing that, that always bothered me, and maybe you still see it, it's not the guy that really knows what he's doing. It's not the kid who's been jumping off the roof since he was 3 years old and riding motorcycles and stealing his mom's car and stealing police cars and now wants to jump a really small, fast canopy because that's what he does, right? Or she does, right?
The next
like
step,
like those people, hey man, like I wish you the best, but you're going to make your decisions. It's the people who get pushed into jumping small canopies because they're told that's what you're supposed to do.
Yep.
The person who doesn't want to be under a canopy, that they don't want to be going that fast, and yet they have big stinky guys like me on the drop zone saying, oh, that 150 is too big for you, you're underloading it. I mean, does that still happen? Is that still a problem in the sport?
It is. It's still there. It's still there.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote a fairly complex chart with, your this much experience and this is your weight. And here's 2 different sizes. One that's like the minimum, which is relatively conservative. And then the sort of recommended size. So there's some, safety margin built in there with a nonlinear twist to the numbers, if you will. So in other words, the lighter people, I'm recommending actually a lighter wing loading. And the bigger people, I'm tipping them towards a slightly heavier wing loading because, let's face it, a 230 is a dog no matter what you hang under it. So, so I added that in there, but I still find that people will want to go to the smallest size they're allowed to on the chart.
Yeah.
The smallest they're allowed to. And part of it is because they want to have that teeny little rig on their back. So they look like
Yeah.
a grown up. They look like a big, grown up jumper. And the
Yeah.
other side of it is, what's everybody else doing? And I think that it's one of the reflections every human being needs to take a look at is how am I motivating my behavior? Is it based on what feels right to me, what my logical mind and my physiology, my visceral reaction to the world is suggesting? And what do I think the world wants me to do to look cool,
Right.
to be,
Right.
what's the next logical step? People need to sort of not worry so much about what everybody else is doing and just go
Yeah.
go slower, go more gentle, don't rush, and jump that slightly bigger rig so
Yeah.
that they can make those natural mistakes that are just going to happen. You're going to look down and tip
Right.
over. You're going to flare a
Yeah.
little high. You're going to flare a little low.
Yeah.
We can avoid so much by having a little more fabric over our heads.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more.
And the funny thing is, if a drop zone said, hey, we're gonna, gas price is going up, so for the same price of a jump, you're gonna get out 3,000 feet lower, or we're only gonna take you to half the altitude. Everybody's gonna have a fit, right? Because you're taking away my free fall time. You're taking away all my free fall time, right? But because how do you get good? By spending more time doing the sport.
Yeah.
And yet people don't even think for a minute that when you jump a smaller canopy at a higher wing loading, you are coming down so much faster
Mm-hmm.
and you are going to spend so much less time under canopy.
Agreed.
So first of all, you're paying more for less time in the air,
Yep.
and you're compressing the amount of time that you have to learn about canopy flight.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my first canopy was what was it? It was a Raven 3, which is like what, 240. And again, I'm not a small guy. I'm 6'1". I'm like, whatever, around 200 pounds, even when I started skydiving. And that thing was giant and it came down really slow. It didn't land great. But I spent a lot of time for my first 150 jumps just floating around up there going, what does this do? Let's fly over here. Oh, can't get too far downwind, want to land next to all my friends. And you spend more time in the element. So this whole idea of, oh, I'm going to come down so slow, and it's such a big canopy and it goes so slow. Yeah. So you have more time in the air. It's what you're paying for, and more time to learn. And I don't think people factor that into the equation.
Sure. Yeah, the time value is part of it. And to me, the other part is if you're going a little slower under canopy, then your heart is going a little slower and your brain
Yeah.
is processing a little more. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
as the speed picks up, the tunnel gets narrower and you only see what, your sort of fear-based restricted view,
Mm-hmm.
the boa constrictor of adrenaline that's limiting
Right.
your focus. And
Right.
people make dreadful mistakes when they're hopped up on, the crack that the body produces. it's,
Yeah.
so I think that's, you don't want to downsize beyond what your heart can handle.
Yeah.
And that could be quantified. I keep saying it. We should just have heart rate monitors. As soon as somebody lands, what's your blood pressure and heart rate? Sorry, you're not ready to downsize. You still have too much adrenaline after landing.
That would be one metric. Yeah. Or accuracy, like when I learned to jump, if you had, I mean, this big, oh yeah, I'm an old fart, right? Everybody can see my gray hair, learned about jump back in the early 90s. But if you couldn't land, like we have, P gravel pit, right? People still have P gravel pits. If you couldn't land, if you had 100 jumps and you couldn't land pretty consistently in the P gravel pit, people looked at you funny, like, oh, you don't really know how to fly a parachute. What's wrong with you?
Mm-hmm.
And now people don't really value accuracy as much, I
Well,
don't think.
we have to choose to popularize the concept that it is fun to work on landing, not just landing where you wanted to, but getting there in style, with a nice
Right.
program that you already thought out ahead of time and you just follow
Right.
through with your intentions so that you don't have to
Right.
do anything radical and stupid down low to get to the target.
Yeah.
That's big.
That's one thing I loved was, and I don't know if it ever took off, but Jim Hayhurst with his sport accuracy that he was promoting.
Yep.
Um,
I competed in it.
that's,
I love it. I love that
I
event.
mean, accuracy can be fun. Make it hit and
Stand
chug
up.
at the end of the day.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like the hidden chug. Yeah, exactly.
Hit and chug, like something to make canopy flight, precision canopy flight, like you're talking about precision pattern flying, precision accuracy. And it doesn't have to be the people with the big giant canopies and the tuffet coming down and slapping into the ground. I mean, that's cool and everything. But with your normal sport canopy, can you fly precisely? Can you fly accurately?
You're going to land in the
You know?
backyard sooner or later. You got to dodge that above ground swimming pool and the clothes hanging off the line. That's
Yeah.
life. Is that either you're a badass under canopy, or sooner or later your ass is going to feel bad. What? Yeah,
There you go.
take your
That's
pick.
good. Man, I still remember the little park used car lot in DeLand that I landed in one time. I was videoing a tandem. And I think I had like, this is again, I'm an old fart. I was probably jumping a Sabre, original Sabre 150, I think,
Yeah,
shooting a tandem video. And of course, so we're way the heck off the airport, open up. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to get back to the airport. Okay. And it's Florida. So you have lots of trees and swamp and the little used car lot. And, stuffing a 150 into that little used car lot in between the power lines and the fence and the rows of cars. That's bad. You should have put a heart rate monitor on me like 2 seconds after I landed. I used the Flintstone brakes and everything too, man. I had the feet go and slide in the grass, you know, and until you've done that and not, until you've had to do it,
right.
Until you've had to land somewhere really tight like that, it's hard to really appreciate the decision that you're making about the amount of nylon over your head.
The consequences of that are huge. Absolutely. There's a
Yeah.
lot of folks that they see cool videos of people flying these teeny little, I mean, literally now, 60 to 75 square feet is increasingly common on the drop zone.
Yeah.
That used to be the kind of thing you throw the pilot shit out once in a while, fly it around, then cut it away and land something.
Yeah. Right.
Now that's
Land a
normal.
real parachute.
Yeah, because I don't want to jump something so big that the wingsuiters can't stay down with me. that's
Right.
that's where we've gone, and I think we have to
Yeah.
ponder the consequences of our sport en masse heading in that direction, and maybe consider the possibility that we'll just leave that for the folks that are really skilled, and I'm just going to jump something day to day that I can live with, that I can handle
Yeah.
the off field. I can handle the cutting me off on final. Like, I got that, that I can handle myself in every way.
And how do you get really skilled? That's the question. How do you get really skilled? How does someone become a skilled canopy pilot? I mean, like I remember back in, when I first started jumping into land, watching Gus Wing and Howie Doherty, right? And a lot of people don't know, some people know who Gus was.
Yeah, I was hoping
What's that?
we would talk about Howie, because he was also one of the most beautiful canopy pilots, athletic.
Yeah.
Beautiful to watch.
Well, Howie was like, he'd been an athlete all his life. He was a golf, awesome golf player and everything. But Howie was one of the camera flyers in DeLand. And this was when the stiletto was the big, the hot canopy. And I don't think they made anything smaller than a 97, which very few people were jumping. But, the camera flyers in DeLand, first of all, you're video in tandems a lot. And you want to be able to get back, when you're the last one out and, a little long spot. And just, so 150, 135, those were pretty normal canopy flight sizes for people with thousands and thousands of jumps who were jumping every single day for a living. And Howie with his, I don't have my sunglasses here, I can't show it, but Howie with his stiletto 135 would come in, one of the last people to land. So he had the whole landing area open to him, come in off wind and do these beautiful carves just with a 135, I think he was flying, and just lay the canopy on its side with his body, parallel to the ground, and do this 90-degree carve and then bring it in and land in the middle of the peas.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And to be able to understand that you can do amazing things with what now would be considered a big canopy and a light wing loading, but learn the canopy, learn everything that your canopy can do. And it's, there's some surprises there that people never explore.
Absolutely. And some fun.
And fun. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I mean.
Skill is more fun. Skill is definitely more fun. You can do more with it, you can be more imaginative and creative with how you land and everything else. So I think that's one of the messages I hope that this conversation shares with the world is that we don't have to go to tiny parachutes to be a really good canopy pilot. As a matter of fact, in the long run, I think most people would benefit from just lingering in the lighter wing loading as long as they possibly can.
Yeah. How do we make it more fun? How do we make that more fun and more cool, Brian?
Yeah.
How does the sport make staying on a, quote, big canopy, a 150, a 135 for, how do we make that
Yeah. Mhm.
more
Well,
fun?
well, I mean, one of them is I try to lead a good example, and when I show up at a canopy course, I have a multitude of parachutes because if I'm flying with somebody that's on a sub 100 square foot canopy, I need a sub
Mm-hmm.
100 square foot canopy. But I spend a lot of times on a lot of my jumps on 150s and 170s.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Partly because I can float with the big parachutes, but partly because I can make that 170 look good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can make it look fast. I can lay down a carve. I can do a nice, clean braked approach and demonstrate
Yeah.
how the capability of brakes, let it off and flare, can put you down in a tiny spot. And yet the
Mm-hmm.
next jump, I'll wind it up with a 270. Okay,
Right.
starting scary low because you have to, you know.
Yeah.
But it demonstrates that that parachute has a lot more latitude than people assume because all they've ever seen somebody do on a 170 is a
Mm-hmm.
long, boring,
Ooh, show and tell. Can I show a video?
yeah, man.
I found this because I was wondering if you were
You
gonna.
should be able to share right now, I think.
Okay, so this is a video that maybe you've seen, and I'm gonna set the stage. So I forget what so I was working for PD test jumping, and for some reason we were doing. I think we were bringing out a smaller size navigator
Yeah.
student canopy. So for like the previous 3 weeks or whatever, that's all I was jumping with these navigators, testing the new size before it went on the market. And then we had a whatever FLCPA, Florida Canopy Piloting Association meet. So Chris Hayes at the time was running the meets, and we had one in DeLand. So I was like, okay, I want to go swoop, but I hadn't jumped my own canopy like hardly ever because I was test jumper, just always jumping other stuff. And so I was doing terrible in this meet. I was probably jumping my velocity or something, doing terrible in this meet. And so for the last round, I was like, screw it. And I went to the classroom and grabbed one of the student rigs with a Navigator 220 in it, taped up some dive blocks on the front risers with vet tape. And for the last round, I jumped a Navigator 220. And I didn't even worry about like scoring or anything. But so this video is have you ever seen this video? It's floating around on the internet.
No, yes. Let's show
So
you can. You should be able to share.
you made me think of it with what we can do with having fun with bigger canopies, right? So this is me, exit weight about 220, Navigator 220. Can you see the video?
I can. Yep, it's playing. Sweet. Sweet. There it is. There it is. And of course, the naysayers are going to, that was downwind. Must have been downwind.
No, it wasn't. I don't know. You can look back and look at the.
I just want to get that out because you can do that without it being downwind.
Yeah, you can do that without being downwind. I don't think we were doing downwind in the competition. But yeah, I mean, the idea is even if it was, so what? Yep. Right? Well, like, okay, exactly. you're a big bag canopy pilot. You should be able to land a student canopy downwind, and like, but the idea is you can have fun with bigger canopies. You can, and so at one point in the past, people did because that's all we had. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about lingering at some of the larger sizes, I mean, what can you really do with your canopy? Yeah. And that's why I think some competitive challenges like make accuracy cool again. And no, not the tough at accuracy, but sport accuracy. Yep. Some type of non-swoop version of swooping that requires precision. We've got GPSs now. What about three-dimensional, like, imaginary, whatever, balloons in the sky, yep. Like with Nintendo, right? Where you have to try to have your canopy at a certain altitude and fly a precise pattern. Yep. One thing I used to love to do when I was working with instructors, and here, this is also for any, instructors who are watching or, will be instructors. So if I was working with a group of instructors, I would, on one of the jumps, have them jump student gear. Mm-hmm. And the only restriction was it has to be appropriate for a student of your size and wing loading, not like what they'd be jumping when they have 30 jumps or whatever, but appropriate for a student progression jump. And you may not do anything under canopy that you would not want your student to do. So no, like, coming in and breaks on the approach to hit the target. Go fly the pattern that you would want your student to fly. And, the instructors would be like, really, do I have to? This is going to be boring. Not saying that, but, I get the eye rolls and
You can,
everything and the
yeah, you can see it in their eyes. Yeah,
chuckles.
I do the same thing, by the way.
You do this too? Oh, excellent. Because they'd come down and they'd be like, you'd watch them. I knew it was going to happen. They'd go sailing past the P's because
Yep.
they're not used to that low rate of descent. I'm like, yeah, bye-bye. And, and then they'd come back and be like, yeah, it was hard. Like, yes, it's hard because you have not jumped the size and wing loading that you're teaching people to jump. You haven't done that in the last 5 years. That's why I made you do it today.
Or a lot longer.
Yeah.
I just busted somebody who was advertising a canopy course that he was about to run, and it shows him swooping his 66 square foot canopy barefoot over pavement
Okay.
as his ad, like, see how good I am, you can trust me to teach you how to fly parachutes. And I had to comment, I couldn't help myself. It's like, do you have any photos or video of you landing a much bigger parachute beautifully, because that might help you get customers more than this sort of ego driven photo. He wasn't very happy with me. And then he came back with a video of him landing a tandem with a 180-degree hook turn. Like, no, that's not what I meant either.
Tandem doesn't count.
It doesn't.
No.
Yeah.
I
Nor does.
mean, it's a legitimate,
Yeah.
it's a legitimate question to ask somebody who's running a canopy camp.
Yeah.
What sizes and wing loadings and types of canopies have you jumped in the last year?
What have you? Yeah. What
Like,
have you done lately? Yeah.
what have you done lately? Because that was like the whole advantage that I had for running the canopy school when I did it. Two things, basically. I mean, a few things, but like what I learned from John LeBlanc, which I've already talked about. But also, when I started the canopy school, I was test jumping full time for PD, and not just little tiny things, right? Like all the customer service stuff. Somebody sends their canopy in and says, hey, this is opening too hard. This is opening too slow. This has a built-in turn. So they inspect it and then they send it out to us at the drop zone. And so like I'd be jumping, whatever, Stiletto 97 on load 1 and a Sabre 190 on load 2, and just, a little bit of everything all day long. So and this is just, for anybody who is an instructor or a coach or a canopy coach now, there's no substitute for being out there and having recent experience jumping a variety of sizes and wing loadings and types of canopies, because then when you can actually understand where your students are coming from, not just your perspective from your 60 whatever, swoop landings that you've done for the last 5 years.
Yeah. Nurturing compassion. Yeah, to me, that's what it's all about. Nurturing your ability to see through that person's eyes, and then you teach based on that.
Right. Yeah. It's about the student. It's not about us and how cool we look landing our little tiny handkerchiefs. It's about what the student needs. And I love the way you said that, looking through the student's eyes. Mm-hmm. That's what we do. We look through the student's eyes.
If you're doing your job well, yeah. It's not an ego-driven thing. It's, when I look at my students, I love every one of them, and I just want to help them to land safely every time. They all got mamas. You know what I mean? I want them all to go home safe and sound. And some of them, you can see it in their eyes. They need the little slow down. You're getting a little ahead of yourself here. And others need the opposite, where you got to like, no, you're better than this. You can push a little harder. Don't be so timid.
Yeah.
You just got to know how to get inside their mind enough that you can say that next thing, that next insight that they're going to go.
The next thing, right? That's exactly it. Zone of proximal learning, right? Like this is a phrase that's used a lot in learning science. You don't take somebody who just learned algebra for the first, week and go put them in an advanced calculus class, right? Like your brain can process the next step in progression. Or in the military, they say crawl, walk, run, right? Crawl, walk, run. So there is a step that you can take that's pushing your abilities, that's fun and scary, but within your ability to manage and handle. And that's where we need to be focusing on, not pushing somebody to what we think they should be doing because it's fun for us, right? Did you know Tamara Coyne? Did you know her very well?
Very well. Oh yeah, jumped with her plenty of times, yeah.
I haven't talked to her in so long, but I remember, I always think when we have these conversations about like, the right size, the right wing loading. So for people who don't know who Tamara is, she was in the days, when freestyle skydiving was the big thing. You can't believe what she can do. Like the perfect picture I remember of Tamara is so she has a dance background. So she's in like a I don't know, she's got like her arms straight out like this and she's got her legs straight out, but her knees are bent and her feet and her toes are pointing straight down. She's got like
Yes.
these ballerina feet pointing straight at the ground. And she's just sitting there smiling and does a 360 and then turns and tracks off in this crazy, like,
Yeah.
split with the feet pointing down body position. So she's an amazing, amazing, pilot in the air, amazing body pilot.
Yeah.
And I forget what size canopy she was flying, but it wasn't super small.
120.
Maybe 120. Yeah.
Let's see.
And I remember her saying one time, I don't know if she ever told you this, but the reason she skydives is because ever since she was a little girl, she wanted to fly like Peter Pan.
Mm-hmm.
That's why she skydives. And, she doesn't need to be jumping a super small, super fast, go fast swoop thing. She wants to get on the ground safe. I mean, I don't know, she was a good canopy pilot, right? But I don't remember her being like into, I want to go fast under canopy and go swooping.
No.
And nobody can tell her she needs to,
Yeah.
right?
She landed softly. She always landed softly. She landed where she wanted to. She had her ballet slippers or whatever it was that she'd keep inside of her jumpsuit, and under canopy she'd take them out and put them on because she didn't like to have any shoes on when she was in free fall.
Right.
Yeah,
and like not a super tiny rig either, right? Not the smallest, tiniest rig she could get her hands on.
I could be wrong about the size, by the way. Yeah.
But maybe it was 120, but she wasn't.
She was tiny.
Yeah. She was tiny. And so, she could do all this amazing freestyle, free flying, whatever you want to call it, in the air. And, the rig was a little bigger, but,
Didn't stop her. But she was smart enough to have a belly band, as I remember. Break from moving all around, which
keep it from moving around. Yeah, right.
People do that, right? Magic did that, right? Doug Park's old team, they went to nationals and competed as Magic, but they also competed as Black Magic, where they did all the points on their backs.
Right.
And their goal was to not be last, and of course they had the belly band so the rigs wouldn't swim around, and they succeeded in not being last. And I always think, man, oh man, can you imagine being the team that got beaten by a bunch of guys flying freak?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just letting people know there are choices, and it doesn't have to be go as small as you can, as fast as you can, like you're making a choice whether you think you are or not, whether you go along with the crowd and say, yeah, I want the smallest, fastest thing, this tiniest rig, we'll see what happens when I have to land in somebody's backyard. You're making a choice, and it is your choice whether you're going along with the crowd or not, and make the choice that
the one you can
be good in the long run.
Yeah.
The one you can live with. Yeah.
The one that where you're at 100 feet off the ground looking at a really scary situation that's not normal. It's not the peas. It's not the bees in front of you. It's like, you're out there in Babylon. And you will be glad that you've got that extra square footage over your head that you were able to. And the same thing with the reserve choices. Wouldn't you rather have a bigger reserve? Just, who knows what circumstance you're under once you pull the handles.
Yeah, that's a decision too, like I didn't jump. It was only the last couple of years that I was skydiving that I jumped with, I had an AAD, because I mean, most of what I was doing was canopy flight, and some drop zones that I went to, it was required. So I got one. But, people would say, oh, shouldn't, you wouldn't want to have it. And like, I made my choices about the canopies I was flying and the rigs and everything. And people would say, oh, you should have an AAD. I'd be like, what makes you think I'm going to survive a landing under this size reserve if I'm unconscious?
Yeah. There it is.
Because, like that's when I'm going to need an AAD, is if I'm knocked out, probably, more than likely. I mean, you never know, like I'm not, impervious. But that's a consideration that people don't think. Like, yeah, I want a super tiny container, but what if you are knocked out and your AAD saves you and you're going to land under that reserve? What if you're going to land that reserve on somebody's backyard? So it's a choice, right? I'm not saying don't get the tiny thing, but just realize the choice that you're making and be prepared for it. Like, be a good enough canopy pilot that you can handle those situations and understand the risk you're taking.
Absolutely, yeah. So that you can be an old skydiver and still healthy.
Yeah.
Right. To me, that's one of the greatest goals. I don't know if you remember. There was another Rocky, Rocky Radabaugh, who used to jump at Chambersburg. We lost him a few years ago to old age cancer kind of thing. And I always used to say, Rocky, man, you are my idol. And he'd
Mm-hmm.
laugh. He'd like, why? I don't know what I did to be your idol, but it's like because he was out there smiling, having fun, jumping up, into his 80s.
Yeah.
To me, that's a true sky god. That's somebody that still
Mm-hmm.
has a positive attitude, that's still learning, that's still challenging himself and enjoying it. And he used to jump
Mm-hmm.
a big parachute, of course, and that I think is part of the formula to
Yeah.
becoming an old skydiver is learning how to stow the ego. This vulnerable thing that wants to prove something to daddy that you're cool and brave.
Yeah.
And just well, what's going to get me to that rocky status?
Yeah. Or what's fun, right? What's fun right now? You're gonna go out to the drop zone this weekend and pay a whole bunch of money to jump out of airplanes. Are
Mm-hmm.
you really having fun under that little tiny canopy? Are you really having fun? Are you not what everybody else says you should be doing, not what your, big stinky boyfriend's doing, or not what the, latest, swoop team is doing, but are you having fun under that canopy? You know?
And to sort of recognize that what we sometimes label as fun is actually just an adrenaline addiction.
Yeah.
That is it really fun to be oh my god, where you're
Yeah.
just terrified and yet enjoying the
Yeah.
terror, or are you
And maybe it is,
oh,
but recognize that that's what it is. Recognize that that's what it is.
well, there it is, know thyself. Yeah, that's it.
Right. Yeah.
Know the
Just
risk
just
that you're in.
know where you are, know what just choices you're making, and make them conscious choices, make them mindful choices.
Sure.
That's it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Listen to us being all philosophical.
Well, that's one of the other reasons why I wanted to chat with you online here like this, because we always have good philosophical conversations, and it always comes
Yeah.
down to the mind, to the processing of the individual about, like you say, choices that lead to
Mm-hmm.
natural consequences. Some of them involve crutches. Some
Yeah.
of them involve, becoming the kind of skydiver that you're really proud of.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's what I'm hoping people will sort of go in that direction and
Yeah.
leave the ego out of it.
So, all right, I'm going to put you on the spot, Brian.
Hmm.
Tell us, do you have a scary off-field landing story? I told you my DeLand used
Oh
car
yeah,
lot story.
oh yeah.
What's yours?
I got a lot of them. When you talking about accidental off-field landings or deliberate?
Yeah.
Because I've done both.
Well, you can make your choice, but I'm thinking unintentional, unplanned
Yeah.
off-field landings
Oh
where
my
you had to use some
god.
skill to.
Yeah, I've had a few. Well, when you said Deland, I was like, well, I might as well throw my Deland story down. My dad came to the drop zone once in my life. I mean, he died when I
Hmm.
was fairly young skydiver, but he came out with me to Deland with some trip to Florida, going to visit
Hmm.
relatives, and I had a rig in the car. I made one jump. My dad watched me march out to the 182 in Deland. I followed an AFF out, and they said, make sure you leave a lot of. Yeah, they put me so far off the drop zone. There was no way to get back, and I wasn't heads up enough back in those days to just track off and pull high, to get some
Hmm.
some distance from the AFF. And in that case, there would be nothing wrong with just popping high. I wasn't
Right.
I wasn't used to being given such a terrible spot. I landed so far off that I was not back at the drop zone for like the better part of an hour. And my dad
Hmm.
was not looking so good. he was looking
Oh.
really he was looking really, really nervous. And
Oh
and
no.
I had to manage to, isolate where am I gonna land? How am I going to make the approach? What direction is the wind coming from? You got to figure that out. If you don't have the windsock, there's a lot there.
Right.
And I made an instructional video not so long ago. Basically, it was DZ Unknown, just talking about this process of figuring out what are you going to do now? How are you
Yeah.
going to keep your adrenaline down enough that you can make good decisions? How are you going to maybe reduce your descent rate when you're up there so you can rethink your initial conclusions because you might be wrong,
Hmm.
about
Hmm.
oh I'm going to land there, and then later on you're like oh my god, is that a power line through the middle of the landing area that I wanted?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
new plan, and I managed to sort of dodge the sketchy stuff and land God knows where. I don't even remember where it was. I couldn't pick it out on a map, and I had to
Hmm.
hitch a ride.
Hmm.
Nobody came to get me. Nobody knew I was
Oh
gone.
no.
Nobody knew I was gone. Yeah, yeah.
Oh man, that stinks.
Yeah. So well, but it was a lesson in a lot of different things. Yeah, and one of them
Hmm.
one of them about landing off is look down before you jump out of the airplane and recognize you
Mhm.
don't have to jump out at
Yeah.
all. You
Yeah.
don't have to jump out now. You don't have to jump out later. If you don't like what what you're seeing when you get to the door, close the door. Talk to the pilot.
And know what to look for. Like spotting is there's the whole art and science of spotting and if you really want to be good at it.
Mm.
If you're jumping rounds, like
You
there's a whole art and science there.
Yeah,
But there's also enough to know that
yeah,
I don't want to get out here. This is not how this works, right? That's not
yeah,
the picture I want to see.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we have to move out of this sort of follow orders, march in lockstep with everybody else sort of mentality that we were all trained into as a student in school. Sit down and
Mhm.
shut up. Be more convenient
Right.
to me, the teacher. Right? Don't
Right.
question authority. Don't think for yourself. Just do what you're told.
Right.
If that leads in some positive aspects as a skydiving student, right? I do want my students to do what I tell them to do. I do. And
Right.
yet I also I don't want them to always do what I'm telling them to do if their gut is saying otherwise or if their data set is saying otherwise. Hey, by the way, as I'm walking out
Yeah.
to the loading area at Quincy, and I had a free fly student with me, and we're talking. And I'm looking at him, but he's looking this way where the huge dark cloud is coming. I didn't see it. I couldn't see it
Yeah.
because I'm briefing him. You know how you're in your head when you're doing the briefing?
Right. Right.
Well,
Right.
when we
Right.
exit, just think about this and blah, blah, blah. And this storm was coming. It was horrible. And he said, Brian, he tapped me on the shoulder and he alerted me. This guy with 100 jumps or whatever alerted me to this cloud. And I immediately was like, about face, let's go. So we ran back to the tent. I ended up tipping over some tables so we could hide behind them. And we got hit with one of those micro bursts that you get at Quincy where the big top tent came down with the
Yeah.
telephone poles and the TVs that were up on there crashed on the ground. And
Hmm.
there was stuff embedded, objects embedded in the tables that we were hiding behind. Good thing I thought of that. I don't know what made me think of it. Maybe the movie Twister.
I I don't know how often that's happened, but I was there for one of those. That was scary.
It happened several
Yeah.
times. But that's
But yeah, like you said, it's interesting what you're saying about the way we are, because I mean that's I think a legitimate criticism of our education system in the US and a lot of parts of the world is it's convenient for students who just don't think for themselves, who just follow orders, right?
Mhm.
And we think of ourselves as skydivers as not being that way, right? We're the rebels, we're the ones that went against the grain. We're not sitting on the couch watching football on Sunday afternoon. We're out of the drop zone being skydivers, woohoo. And I think we don't always remember or take the time to be aware of our we all have certain tendencies to follow the crowd
Yeah.
and to not think for ourselves maybe as much as we could. So just recognize, yeah, you're a skydiver, you're going against the grain, but we all have that to some degree. And how is it serving you? And in what ways is it not serving you? It's important to think about,
Yep.
like you were
Yeah.
saying.
Just finding that balance between being a sort of cooperative and at the same
Mhm.
time observant and sort of listening to your own gut and recognizing when following the crowd isn't going to serve you. It's going to
Right.
keep happening. As a
Yep.
skydiver and as a human being, you see the crowd marching towards the cliff. You're like, I don't want to go that way.
Yeah.
No, no, thank
Yeah.
you. That's a big one, and hopefully that'll be one of the lessons that skydivers take with them and are able to apply it to the rest of their life.
Yeah.
That is
Yes.
one of my hopes that the adventure wisdom will metastasize within the mind
Hmm.
and spread. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that you're definitely one of those people that has always done that, and you've created a lot in the sport that you don't even realize how much your mindset, your love of canopy flight, your love of good teaching. You've always been an exceptional communicator, and
Thank you.
it's that your willingness to step out of what the crowd is doing and create something new that has changed the sport for the better in a very significant way.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Brian. It means a lot coming from you. You've that you're definitely, I think, a great example of that yourself. So I appreciate that.
It's one of my goals. Well, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. I clearly could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but I'm not so sure that listeners are going to be able to do that. But thanks so much, Scott, for taking the
Yeah,
time.
thank you, Brian.
And so people can find you now. Of course, you're doing uh, life coaching stuff, right?
Time coaching. Yeah, I help people transform their relationship with work and time, especially leaders, especially people in leadership positions. A lot of people have a toxic relationship with time, and as Skydivers, we learn to master that 60-second interval. But try to take some of those lessons and help people live purpose-filled lives and have purposeful productivity in their lives, be satisfied with what they're doing with their time and their work, rather than always feeling like there's not enough time or that they spend all day working and don't get anything done. So that's what I'm doing now.
Beautiful.
And yeah, for anybody who's interested in what I'm doing now, it's scottmillercoaching.com. Can I give a plug on your show here, Brian?
Yes, you can. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, excellent. Well, that's it. scottmillercoaching.com.
Scott Miller coaching.
And yeah,
That's. I think it's wonderful. And for those that sort of just getting to know Scott through this great conversation, seriously consider looking him up. Yeah, I mean, we all have the need that we don't necessarily recognize of a mentor that's truly heartfelt, that's driven by kind of higher ideals. And Scott's the man. He can help. So look him up. Give it a chance. You never know what your life can be if you get that little bit of assistance, that insight from outside, from somebody that's being the mirror of you.
thank you, Brian.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. I hope you have an awesome day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, you too, Brian. Thank you so much for having me here. This is definitely an honor. I enjoyed it.